Welcome to Twin City Talk. Today we are interviewing our very own Tim Beeman. Hi, Tim.
Hi.
He's
Hey, Tim.
the
Hi.
one that
How you
makes
doing
this
today?
all happen.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm the technical guy. The brains behind this is probably the other two, and I'm just putting it together and making it sound and look good, or at least decent.
I don't know if I share that sentiment. I would say that it's a joint effort, to say the least.
Yes. So you've been podcasting a long time.
18 years.
How did you get into it?
So the story goes, I wanted to be a radio DJ. If I wasn't going to be a rock star, which was what I really, really wanted to do, and I gave it all I had. But if I wasn't going to be a rock star, I wanted to support other music people and be on radio. I've always been fascinated with DJs, especially the big name DJs, even local people DJs get a lot of maybe put on a pedestal more than they should sometimes, but they do. And I'm like, I want to do that then if I can't be a rock star. And I just, for whatever reason in my head, I convinced myself that I wouldn't be good at that. And then along 2007, in 2003, podcasts started with Adam Curry, who was a former VJ on MTV. He was known for his big blonde hair and his leather jackets and all that stuff. But he had a podcast, and I can't remember I think it was called The Source Code, and it was called a podcast because it was to be played on personal listening devices like iPods.
Yeah.
And
Funny.
yeah. So he was the original Podfather. I'll give him props for that. But I'm like, this new thing is coming around called podcasts, and it's basically radio on demand. And I was a musician. I had a recording studio in my house. So I'm like, if I mess up, I can just fix it, right? And that's why I decided I wanted to do it. And the first podcast that I ever did, I was a co-owner of a comic book store. And we were so big in sales and size, we were the second biggest in the state, that we were invited to join the monthly Marvel Comics phone call. It was a group call. And so we would record that. I would take it back to my house, add a little bit of commentary, and then just play the call. The Marvel knew that we were doing it, and they gave us the okay for it. But that's what I would do. I would add some commentary and then come back and have something to say, and then we'd put them out. And that was the first part of the podcasting journey. And then in 2010, in February, I had thought of the idea in 2009 with a friend of mine who was 11 years younger than me. I said, I want to do a pop culture podcast that is about 20 minutes long, because that's the average commute in this area. And I want to talk about movies, music, sports, television, technology, and beer. And I wanted him to be like the younger view and me be the older view, which I wasn't even 40 at that time. But I was older than him, right? And so we started a podcast called The Less Desirables, which is now the oldest continuously running pop culture podcast in North Carolina. It has been going, last week was 15 years.
It's crazy.
Cool.
Every Wednesday, minus one, for 15 years, we have released an episode. Last night was number 786. I haven't changed the thing. So next week, 787. But yeah, so we've done that. We evolved a little from it was a lot from the movies, music, sports, all that. We still talk about music a lot. We'll talk about movies when something comes along that we all want to talk about, whoever we all are. And, but now we focus on the movers and shakers and the events and people of Winston-Salem and the surrounding areas. We have people from King, Yadkinville, Greensboro. We have people in the area.
Yeah.
We're Triad, I guess, but mostly Winston-Salem. And that's where we are now with that.
That's unbelievable.
What are some memorable episodes that you've had?
Well, hang on 2 seconds. So, I'm just so fascinated by that because, podcasts they were barely a thing when you started that 18 years ago. And and here you are 15 years running on the same show.
Yeah.
That's a feat. That's impressive.
Well, it was funny. We started on February the 3rd, 2010, and our first guest, outside of just somebody sitting in, was St. Patrick's Day. It was a Wednesday that year. And we had a guy who we called the beer guru because he had judged many beer festivals. He had tried probably over 3,000 beers at the time, been to over 300 breweries and all that stuff. So he came on, and afterwards we went to Finnegan's Wake, which Finnegan's Wake on St. Patrick's Day back then wasn't the big thing. It was the weekend before that was the big shindig.
Right.
When we went there to go have a Guinness, because why not?
Because that's what you do.
Yeah, and people saying, "Hey, what have you been doing?" I said, "Well, we just recorded a podcast." And you're like, "A what?" And I had to explain a podcast about 8 times that night. And my joke is, for the first little bit, I had to explain 7 times a week what a podcast was. Actually, 7 times a day sometimes what a podcast was whenever I was promoting I was doing it. And then moving from that, as time went on, now I only have to explain about once every 7 weeks. So it's a whole lot better. But you're right, Burgess. When I started, there was no one around here doing it. No one.
No one.
I have been doing it longer than anybody else, and I didn't have YouTube to go to because YouTube was still in its infancy.
Yeah.
I didn't have other people to call and, as people do me, pick their brain. I had to learn it all myself. Luckily, I had some studio experience, so I knew how to do that part. But the distribution and all that, I really had to learn it.
So, reversing for half a second, then let's go back to the rock star days for a moment. So you said you really wanted to do that, but you never really got into what instrument you played, or were you a singer, or what was your thing with that?
I am a bass player. I have played bass since I was about 13, 14 years old.
Totally would have guessed that, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
I am a bass player material, really. I was in a band that regionally was pretty big called Heaven's Sake. It was not a gospel band. It was more along the lines of, oh, for heaven's sake. And all 3 of us, we were a 3-piece, were huge Kiss fans. So we sounded a lot like Kiss. And we understood that and, go with your strengths, right? We could play almost anything, but that's what we did. And we put 2 albums out. The first one was self-titled. The second one was called Shinola. The second one was produced by Mitch Easter, who anybody who is into the music scene here or REM fans, he produced their first 2 albums. And he's become a pretty good friend of mine. We don't hang out, but when we see each other, we have long conversations and catching up.
Did you ever have him on the podcast?
No, we hadn't. He's hard to track down, really. So, but Burgess,
That's a cool story.
We did that. That was in the mid '90s, and we had aspirations. But the drummer didn't like people telling us no, and after a while, he just got tired of it and moved on. And now he's doing his own thing, self-producing stuff, and we play it on Camel City Radio and everything. So it's a
cool background.
Yes.
I always love to hear the stories of the swings that people take at whatever it is they're doing, which is one of the reasons why I told you I thought you'd like Man in the Arena, the quote from Roosevelt, just the idea of, it belongs to the people that are out there swinging. I really like that a lot. That's very cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. And I kind of got away from the music thing, not necessarily by choice, but not by choice. The last song that I ever wrote was about 15 years ago. I wrote a song to my wife, who was not my wife at the time. We hadn't even started dating. And I knew how I felt, and I wrote her a song and played it for her on what we call our first date, which was going to see Cowboy Junkies in Charlotte. And I told her 2 days before, I got to warn you, I wrote you a song. And she goes, what? And I said, I wrote you a song. So I took my guitar and handed her the lyric sheet, sat down before we left, and played the song for her.
That's great.
That's cool.
Yeah.
When's the last time you played?
Oh, I'd say I was, last year, I've been the backup bass player for the Camel City Yacht Club. So whenever they're playing, if Charlie Chardonnay, or as we know him, Jerry Chapman, can't make it, then I step in and take over his spot for that show. But he's not been unavailable in about 8 months, so I've not played. And oddly enough for me, I don't even pick up instruments unless I have a gig to prepare for anymore. Because podcasting and all the other things that I do, voiceovers and the radio station, all that has taken over my creativity. And that's what I have to put my efforts into now.
Yeah, so you do a lot more than just podcasting now. Can you tell us a little bit about Such and Such Media?
Yeah, so Such and Such Media it's still podcasting in a lot of ways. It's podcast production, coaching, creation for other people, like this. I was doing my own thing, but that was not making me any money. And I wanted to get out of my house, which, sharing the loft with my bedroom and having people just walk through my bedroom every Wednesday was old for me and my wife. So I said, I got to move out, but I have to pay rent. So I've got to find a way of doing that. And somebody had come to me, hey, can you tell me how to do a podcast? I'm like, no. I can tell you what not to do, and I can tell you that it would be easier for you if you just let me do it, because you're going to spend money on equipment you don't know how to use. You're going to spend money on equipment that you may not use more than once because you're going to go, that's a pain in the behind. You will spend a lot of frustrating time watching videos on how to make this happen, and you still won't get it, and you'll still need somebody to help. Like you can attest, my job is to have someone come in, do what they do, and I say I'm like Ronco. You set it and forget it. You come in, say what you got to say, and you walk out. And the only thing you have to worry about from that point is your show notes, right? Yep. And I take care of everything else. So when someone comes to me and says, I have an idea for a podcast, okay, let's sit down and talk about it. I listen. I give them some homework, which is generally, I want to see an outline of their first 3 shows, what they envision, the first 3 episodes. It doesn't matter if you never keep to that. I just want to see what's in your head. So I know how to approach it from a coaching standpoint, because as I've told you, and I've told everybody that comes in here, you have to make me believe it. People's time is invaluable. Yeah. And they're not going to spend time on a podcast that they can't relate to. So you have to make them believe it. You can't just come, as an actor, you can't just read lines. You have to become something.
It's very accurate.
Yeah. So with podcasting, it's almost the same way. You have to become someone who people can relate to. You have to become someone who believes in what they're saying to make someone else believe it. So then we go from there into the actual come and let's record a couple and see how it works. And if it's not going well, We'll discuss why it's not going well, and then if you want to keep on doing it. Because the last thing I want money, yes, but the last thing I want is people to come in here, not be happy with what they have and what they've done. Why are they not happy? How can we fix that? And if not, then maybe this is not the medium for them. So I coach all the way through, and I want to make sure that everyone is satisfied with their final product. So let's say that you do that and everything's going well, you like it. I take the recording, I massage it, I make it right, I make it sound good, and then I distribute it, which means I put it on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, which is the same. Amazon and Audible are the same, but they are two platforms, but they go through the same stuff. And some other places, iHeart, Pandora, things like that, because that's a process too, that if you don't have time to put into that, you'll forget about it, and then your podcast is done. Yeah. So I make sure that it's always where it needs to be. And I take care of that, manage it from the inside, because if something goes wrong, you don't know who to call. You don't know where to go. You have to, do I get on email? Who do I email? Do I get on the phone? Who do I call? I've already got all those connections. I have those portfolios of my own. So if something goes wrong, I go in and look to see if there's something that I had done, which I know when it goes out, I've done it right, and it won't go out if it's not right. But it's still, I say it's from conception to distribution is where I handle podcasting. Mm-hmm. And I have now produced over 4,800 episodes. So I kind of know what I'm doing.
Just a little bit.
And I want to help others do it, because I think we should all, one thing we all want in life is to be heard. If you have something to say, you want to be heard. And even introverts sometimes just want to be heard. And podcasting to me is a great medium for that, because you can say as much or as little as you want. There's no time constraints. You're not filling 30 minutes or 24 minutes for a television show. You're not just saying 3 words and going. It doesn't matter what you do. You have no time constraints in podcasting. So I don't want to ever quell a conversation that's going well, and I don't want someone to try to pull blood from a turnip. So if it's not working, 10 minutes, that's great. That's 10 minutes of information. You went 40 minutes, great. That was a rolling conversation, and it was interesting from start to end. If it goes longer than that, on a podcast like this format, I will cut it in 2. Let's find a spot where and I'll even go in, hey, this is producer Tim, and we are finished with episode, part 1 of this conversation with that goofball Tim Beeman. Or whatever, I won't say goofball, but I say it for me, because self-deprecation, I wouldn't be the less desirables if I didn't do that. But yeah, to me, it's got to be all that you want it to be with your approval before I put it out, because who else's name is on that? Mine. Yeah. And I have a reputation to uphold in this genre. So I'm not going to put anything out that sounds like crap either. And since we're on video, I'm going to give you my thumbs test. If you have great content but crappy sound, you have a crappy podcast. If you have crappy content and great sound, then you have a crappy podcast. You have great content and great sound, you recorded that with me. So I want you to have the best podcast that you can, and I want it to be a great podcast. And I try my best not to put out crap.
Well, I know with ours you do great.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's excellent work.
Thank you.
Yeah. So back to my original question: what is some of your more memorable podcasts you've recorded?
So I've had Alan Joins on the podcast. I've had Dee Dee Adams on my podcast. I've had musicians, Dusty Waring, who's in a band called Between the Buried and Me, which is a nationally touring act, has been on my podcast. Caleb Cottle and his brother wasn't on the podcast, but I have played his music. But Caleb Cottle is a nationally or internationally touring country artist who's been on here. I've had, let's see, who else have I had? In my studio, he wasn't on a podcast, but been in my studio was Nathan East, who is one of the most recorded bass players in history. And the funny thing is I didn't know who he was when he was in my studio. It was for River Run because he had a film. And my studio was behind Aperture Cinema, and River Run was in that building at the time. And we were just having a little party for that because I had free beer in my spot down in the studio. And one of the people went upstairs and brought him back down. I said, "Hey, Nathan, what do you do?" He said, "I'm a bass player." I said, "I'm a bass player too." And then I felt stupid 2 weeks later whenever I came across a songbook, sheet music for Phil Collins' greatest hits.
Oh, geez.
And he co-wrote Easy Lover.
Oh, my gosh.
I said, "Nathan East, why does that sound familiar?" And then I realized that I have Nathan East's pick, and he was in there eating a salad and drinking a beer that I gave him. And I just love that story.
That's funny.
It's just like, I'm a bass player too. And, hindsight being what it is, I'm sure he actually enjoyed that.
Honestly, I was going to say, I mean, that's the response anyway. It doesn't matter. I mean, if somebody says to me, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm an actor," and they go, "Oh, I'm an actor too," and whatever, I work here on the weekends and I'm pursuing acting. I'm not thinking anything other than cool. Yeah. Great. Tell me your story.
Yeah.
I don't, it's not like I take it personally if they don't know who I am or something.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have that in common. I'm sure that was the cool thing to say regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. And, had I really paid attention, because I'm not a big Eric Clapton fan, but his Unplugged.
Great album.
Nathan East sat right next to him the whole time playing. So I was just, it's just funny for us and the group of people who were there just say, "Yeah, I'm a bass player too." Who else? After 786 episodes, it's hard. I had world champion body painter Cheryl Ann Lipstrew on my show last night.
So when will that one air?
It's up now.
It's up now.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had some unbelievable moments.
Yeah.
Just the things that you end up spilling over into conversations.
Oh, yeah, because it's not so much what we do now. We've kind of gotten away from it, which one of the things was we would always feed our guests and ourselves alcohol while we recorded. And there were some times when people were falling over. We got it on tape. The two, me and Brian, who started this whole thing with me, at the end, we had like 4 10% beers each. And we were just like, rah, 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 and standing up with the mics on and just yelling.
Oh my God.
My end of that would be unintelligible if that's what I had consumed.
Yeah. Yeah, you couldn't understand half of it. Yeah. We've had brewers. We've had the George Gertis, who is the owner of Pulse Vodka, on the show. We've just, there's one episode. I don't do a whole lot of editing for that show because I want it to come off like we're sitting around a table in a bar or at Remedy or something and just having a conversation about whatever comes up. Usually what somebody's doing. Okay, well, I'm doing this, and let's talk about that. And we had one particular that I can remember. I won't say who it was because I don't really even remember because it's that way. He came in, and obviously he doesn't get out much. And he had said he wanted to talk about a couple of things, one of them being mental health. But he came in carrying his own 6-pack, which he said, "I brought this for us." It was Sweet Baby Jesus, the peanut butter beer. And before I ever got to hit record, he had already drank all 6 himself. So when we started going, he just all of a sudden, mental health, and we need And Danielle Bull, who was my co-host at the time, texted me sitting right next to him and says, "We got to stop this. This is stupid." And I told it, I hit stop on the recorder. I said, "Okay, I don't remember his name now." I said, "I want to discuss this with you, but we can't drag us into the hole from the get-go. We have to get there." And he's like, "Okay, man. Okay, I'm sorry. Then he gets up, and in the space that I was in, the bathroom was behind us, and it was one of those folding doors. He didn't even close the door.
Gosh.
He couldn't find because it was a pull chain. So I had 2 women in the studio with me, and he just went in there and let it fly, and came back out. I don't know if he even washed his hands. Came back out and sat back down. And I said, "Okay, you ready now?"
This story is just crumbling as we go.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
I said, "Are you ready now?" I said, "Yeah, I'm good." And then we did a show, and it turned out to be halfway decent. But that's the first time I've ever had to, other than a technical difficulty, had to start something over because it was derailing before we ever got out of the station. And it turned out okay, but he said, "Okay, I'm going to go now. I'm going to go meet a friend." And he was going to meet somebody at a little speakeasy spot here in town. And he got there, and they turned him away. The person he was supposed to meet, I knew him, and I said, "Hey, just so you know, he's on his way." I texted him, and he texted back. He said, "I've not seen him." And this was like 20 minutes later. And so I texted back to him. I said, "Did you?" He said, "Yeah, I talked to the doorman. They turned him away." But that is not indicative of what I allow to go on there. But I was just ready for him to leave. I'm like, "Yes, sir. You go ahead and do what you got to do." And we finished the podcast without him, and he wasn't even there for the picture that we take at the end. And that was one of the most memorable, whether positive or negative, episodes that we had. Dee Dee Adams asking off air before we get started, "Can I cuss?" I said, "I don't give a blank what you do." And because we don't on that show, we say whatever we want. And it's again, 15 years, 780 plus episodes. I would have to really sit down, because you had sent me something the other day about asking that, and I'm like, I don't even know where to start. I'd have to go back through the archives, and because some of it's not even listed on the website, because I've done so many, I had to erase them from the server because it's taking up so much space. And I have like 20 gigs of space on there, and podcasts don't take up a lot of space. No. But I have every episode of everything I've ever done somewhere on backup.
Is that one on video? Is that one on YouTube? No. Okay.
No. No,
I kind of want to see it now.
Because everybody freaks out when they come in anyway. They're like, "Are we on video?" I said, "We'll take a picture at the end, but we're not on video because, I like to keep people as innocent as possible."
I asked for all of my episodes of Young and Restless to be sent to me, and just if I could have it. I figured they'd send me, I don't know, some thumb drives or whatever. I have something like 300 and some odd DVDs that they sent me. I'm like, what am I doing? Stacks of DVDs.
Was each one its own episode? Or
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they're all, individual episodes or, parts of multiple episodes or something like that. I was not what I was expecting to get this, 6-pound mailer show up at my door.
That's really an archive, right?
Well, there. It is. But then I also don't have to worry about like erasing space on a hard drive somewhere either. So there's that. I don't know. It's more tangible, I guess. But yeah. Different kind of storage.
Yeah, definitely. I probably should take the ones that I have and put them on, some
Best of kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And we used to, because we were still in my house, and we would have once every other month, musical artists come in, and they would perform acoustically. And for the first 2 years of that, we actually put together best of things and sold them for $5, and then donated all $5 of each sale. For each sale to Wake Forest Radio, because one of their sub channels actually read newspapers to the blind, and so Brian got my co-founder of this. Got his MBA from Wake, and part of his community service he had to do, he and I went and read newspapers to the blind in the radio station.
Very cool.
And we would like make up voices and all kinds of things. And so when we did the best of CDs, we donated all the proceeds, which, maybe came to about $125 or something total, but $125 that we gave to that radio station to help support them.
That's cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. And we've gotten away mostly from doing the music stuff just because all the people that I was close to that did it, they've already done it. So it had to move it away. One of our favorites, and I think they may have played at the Remedy once, is Couldn't Be Happiers. It's a husband and wife duo, and they both write, they both sing, they both play multiple instruments, so it was just really cool. They were the last ones in here for that. Now, Doug Davis, who is, I call the curator of Winston-Salem music, was the last musician on, but he didn't play, but we did play his new single.
Is there anyone you're trying to get on that you really want to talk to on there?
Burgess Jenkins is one.
I might be able to make a phone call.
Yeah. Suzy Fielders is another. I want Mary Haglund on The Less Desirables.
She's great. Yeah.
She's a trip to interview, and just to talk to about anything.
Yeah.
I love her perspective.
Yeah. Other than that, I'm just always looking for somebody. I don't care. I do reach back out to like past guests who haven't been on in a while. Say, hey, just come. I know a lot of them are into new things, or just catch us up to what you've been up to, or whatever. But yeah, it's I don't have any other than the 2 or 3 that I just mentioned. I just want guests. I want to keep this going for another
15 years.
It's kind of like you said earlier. Everybody's got a story, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, really interesting stuff. It's fun when you get somebody to talk about their passion, or talk about like some crazy experience they had, or something that didn't work, or whatever. I find a lot of that stuff to be as compelling, or maybe even more so than, I've gotten to know some really well-known people in this world and has some great conversations with them, and I take nothing away from that. But sitting over a cup of coffee with, a stranger you meet and table over and go, I overheard you talking about this, and you end up striking up a conversation. I find that to be wildly interesting. It's super cool, the stuff that we share, we have in common. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody tell you a story that you walked away going, that was bananas. I can't believe that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I can't wait to go share that with somebody else.
Yeah.
And if you didn't do that, if you didn't have those conversations, they would just kind of, drift off into obscurity somewhere. I love that stuff. So that's very cool about the show.
Anything else?
How can people find out about yourself?
Run off a couple. I'll tell you, on the Less Desirables podcast network, which we have grown to have many shows on there. The Less Desirables, of course. We have Fan Interference, which is a sports podcast. The Man Who Went to Town, whenever I get to it, I've kind of stepped back from that a little bit, but I do want to bring it back, but I've got to find time. Beeswax Vinyl Daily, which is a 12 minutes or less music history podcast that is every day from this day in music history. 12 minutes or less. Beeswax Vinyl Daily. That's me. I do that one.
That's cool.
The Asylum podcast, which is all about hard rock. Used to be a Kiss podcast, but you can only talk about the same band over and over so many times. Speaking of which, I remember now the Queensryche podcast is on the network. I produced that. Wheeler's Dog, which I am an associate producer of. One of my partners in the radio, Eugene B. Sims, is the host of that. It's just off the cuff, train of thought, stream of consciousness kind of thing. He does kind of plan it out, but it's always funny. Mama's Gonna Make It with Sarah Beth and Ann. They are young moms of young kids who just talk about what it's like being a mom and how do you deal with situations, and it's just really cool. I have the Backstage Chronicles with the Little Theater of Winston-Salem. I have Twin City Talk, which you should already know about if you're watching this. Who else? What else do I have on there?
Forsyth Mags.
Forsyth Mags is not necessarily on the network, but I do their podcast. I'm going to talk to Brooke. I want to put them on the network. What I call G Wizzy, the Greater Winston-Salem Inc. Podcast is called Greater Conversations. I just say G Wizzy because that's GWSI. And I am open for more. But to find out more about that, you want to talk to me, you can look at the website, suchandsuchmedianc.com. You can email me, Tim, at suchandsuchmedianc.com, and call 336-403-2076. Leave a message or text me because I'm not going to answer just random phone calls. That's just how it is in this day and age. So if you want to talk to me, text me first. Hey, Tim, I heard you talk about this. And we'll go from there. I'm all over social media. Any of those shows that I just mentioned, there's probably an account somewhere that's tied to it. And chances are Suzy has access to all of it.
I do.
Infinitely accessible.
Yeah, I am not hard to find at all.
Well, thank you for sharing more of your story. And
absolutely.
For making our podcast as great sounding as it is.
It is fun. I get to meet... outside the people that I would meet on the Less Desirables, this is a whole different angle that I get to meet people with, and I got to meet Burgess, and we shake hands and hug every time we part. It's just I love connections like that. So, thank you. Thank you.
It's a good time.
Thank you. This is Twin City Talk. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. The views and opinions portrayed by guests on this podcast are not necessarily those of the distributors and hosting companies. And if you love this podcast, that's great, but don't think about stealing it. Reach out to us and talk about the content because it is copyrighted.